Welcome to the Every Night is Game Night preview series, the show where designers and publishers share their passion and answer critical questions about their Kickstarter projects. If you're on the fence about a pledge, this is the show for you.
Every Night is Game Night preview series, episode 36, Lockup, a role player tale with Keith Matejka. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night podcast. Our preview series, we are back with another Kickstarter for you. This time we have a gentleman who has been on the show many, many times. This is his third time appearing on the podcast. So we are going to dispense with the get to know you. Go ahead and listen to some of those other shows if you want to get to know this man. We are going to talk about Lockup, a game in the role player universe. We're going to talk about it with Thunderworks Games founder and CEO Keith Matejka. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
All right. Like I said, yes, this man is from Wisconsin. He likes the Packers. He's a big gamer. He likes role players. Okay, we're good.
Done.
Done.
It's interesting. Well, like if you live in Wisconsin, like it seems like you have to be a Packers fan. It's like part of the, it's part of the requirement to live here. But
aren't you guys like part owners or something? Don't you have like stock or something like that?
There's a lot of people who are, and like people will each other like seasons tickets, and geez. Like people are on the wait list for the season tickets for like 30, 40 years and stuff. Like people are crazy about it.
Yep. I think that's a warm-up to saying that you're not quite the Packers fan everybody else is.
Right. I mean, for whatever reason, it's interesting. People, I'm the horrible conversationalist when it comes to like just dude stuff, right? So like, I don't really, I played sports, I enjoy sports, but like, I'm not a sports fan. Mm-hmm. I'll watch it if it's on, but it's not something I seek. But
which is real funny because if we've met you, you look the part. Like you look like big dude, big meaty hands and everything. It's like, all right, let's talk about football, and you're like, no, let's talk about this cool board game I made.
And, it's like I can't really talk about sports a whole lot. I can't talk about cars. Politics is danger zone. And like religion's danger zone, so it's like I can tell you about these cardboard games I make and play, and
there it is,
and like about being a dad, and that's like about it.
That's awesome. Well, let's hear all about Lockup. When I first heard about the project, I was like, ooh, because Lord to Waterdeep is the game that got me into modern board gaming.
Oh, cool. So
Euro worker placement. I came in from role playing, and I never knew that there was this thing. Like it was blew my mind because I played a demo of it before it was even released at like some D&D fest, and so I kind of know the power of what a game like this can do to kind of reach out to an audience because I experienced it myself. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Lockup, which is a game in the role player universe. Let's start with you are not the designer.
I'm not.
The designer is Stan Kordunsky.
Right.
Did I pronounce that right?
I think so. I say Kordansky, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
I'm sure he'll accept either version. But
how did you guys link up, and how did the game, whatever it was before it was a role player game, come into that universe?
Yeah. So I met Stan at a Protospiel. If you're familiar with those, are like these conventions where designers get together and they just play each other's games that are really, really rough, and sometimes they're like designed on the spot. Like I remember playing, King Clank was a good friend of mine, and like I was there when he grabbed some blank cards and wrote on them, and then 5 seconds later we were flipping discs, what eventually became flip ships. It's like some like the origins of some of these games start at these conventions and stuff. And there's always a couple publishers there that are kind of looking for stuff. And I sat down to play this game from Stan. I didn't know anything about him at the time. And I was like, this game's good. I would sign it right now. And he's like, actually, James Matthew from ENGN Games I was just talking to him, and he took my prototype, and he kind of has first dibs on it. So I was like, I'm really excited about this game, but somebody else kind of got to it first. So, and he's like, well, we'll see what James says, and you can be in second in line. I can get sloppy seconds, basically.
If I don't get the number I'm looking for.
Right. So James is a friend of mine as well, and he ended up passing on it. He had some concerns, some smaller design things, and I was like, he didn't want to take the time to kind of work through it. So I was like, I'll jump at it. So I grabbed the game, talked to Stan about it, and signed a contract. And then in the meantime, Role Player, I finished the Kickstarter, and I was looking for. I didn't have anything else in the pipe, and I picked up this game and Dual Powers, which I had kickstarted earlier this year. And then Role Player kind of blew up. Role Player hit retail, and it was like a tiny print run, and everybody thought it was amazing. And then I spent like the next year trying to catch up, like trying to get more copies into the marketplace, and then I ended up doing the expansion, and then at that point, it's time to kind of focus on getting those two other projects done. So the original version was it was a fantasy prison game. That didn't change, right? There's Ratmen and dwarfs in this game, and there was Ratmen and dwarves in the version that I played at the very beginning. So I took it from him, and actually, I took the notes from James about his little concerns, and then I did some more playtesting, and there's some stuff that I felt needed some polish. So then I did a rev on it I just did some development on it. I added a couple things and tried to adjust a few things, and I showed it to Stan, and he was like, I get what you're trying to fix, but I don't like the way you fixed them. I was like, okay. So he's like, give me that back, and I'll show you a new version in a couple months. So he did that, and I was busy with Dual Powers and other stuff anyway. And then I met up with him at another convention, and he showed me the changes. I'm like, oh, these are cool, So that was kind of his revised version, and it addressed some of the things that James had issues with. It definitely increased replayability. It changed the way the guards worked. It changed the way suspicion works in the game.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's break some of that stuff down, because I feel like we're talking on a high level. Let's get a sense for what exactly is happening on the board, and we can kind of jump from there. Yeah.
So the board is there are different areas of a prison. So there's the exercise yard, and the commissary, and the smithy, and the sewers, and the chow hall, and the cell block. In the game, you have workers, but they all have different values, and you keep them secret. And when you place them on the board and going around the table, kind of Stone Age style, where you can place as many workers as you want, but once you've placed there on a future turn, you can't place there again. And the thing that makes it really interesting is that of the workers that you have 6 of them. 2 of them can be placed face down, and the other ones have to be face up. So there's these moments of bluffing, because within each region of the board, there's different rewards. So, for example, if you go to the infirmary, you're going to get a resource called a potion. And the person with the highest strength is going to get 3, and the person with the lowest strength is going to get 1, and everybody in between is not going to get anything. Mm-hmm. Or if you go to the sewers, then if you have the highest, you're going to get 3 scrap, which is a different resource. And then but second place is going to get 2, and everybody else is going to get 1. So you're kind of fighting for the better versions of the rewards at each location, and some of your pieces are face down. So you can do some bluffing, right? You can put 3 tokens down, and 2 of them are face down, but they're your lowest value ones. But they don't know, your opponents don't know that, and they're trying to figure out what you did. But over the course, sometimes you'll hold your better moves back because you want your opponents to kind of use up their face down ones, so that you get a better sense of what those face down ones could be or whatever. So
it's really important, like what you're talking about, because I'm glad you mentioned Stone Age. So Stone Age, I wouldn't say it's the perfect example of theme, but it kind of works. You have the meeple, you put it in the love shack, and you get the 2 meeples, and
right.
it makes sense, right? The fact that this is in a prison matters, because the fact, because it's in a prison, you can't just freely trade and, I go to the commissary, I get 2 food or whatever. No, I mean, everybody's kind of out for themselves, but nobody can actually fight. It's not a fighting thing, because the guards are obviously going to look at you and whatever. So you have to kind of get things, sneak them in there. I used to work in a prison in real life. So it's this is kind of how it is. People are sneaking stuff around, and they're trying to get one over on it, and it has to be all on the down low. I love the fact that the theme of a worker placement, and worker placement are not famous for theme, but it feels like you guys put a lot of thought into that, marrying the theme of the game with the feeling that the players are having in the game.
There's definitely kind of some secrecy and some bluffing, but you're also putting your guys around, and thematically you're trying to become like known as the toughest crew, because like the king is coming to his prison in 6 days, so because the game's 6 rounds long, and whoever's like the toughest crew, he's going to allow that group to go to a coliseum to fight for their freedom. So you're not like trying to escape from prison, but you're trying to be in the top spot so that you can go kind of get an opportunity to fight. And so it's a little bit like removed from what's happening in the game in terms of like the whole, like you're getting this fighting chance. But it was interesting working on this game. I'm also working on other role player related things. And so as a result, like this there's been a lot of world building going on. So we're like, I'm working on a kind of a narrative based game. And one of the adventures in that game takes place in this prison. So it's like, I have all this backstory kind of that's coming for these things. And it's like, there's this coliseum that's mentioned in the rulebook in this game. And if you go on in, a year and a half or something, when you play role player adventures, there's an adventure in that coliseum and you get to fight for your freedom as well. In that experience. So there's all kind of these subtle, like forward looking thematic connections that I make in this game. So it's like when you buy and play it now, there's a bunch of little Easter eggs on the board that, they don't mean anything to you right now, but in a couple of years when you're playing other role player games and you go back and play Lockup and you're like, hey, what's that? Oh, that's that thing from that other game.
It's funny because when we first talked about role player, and we were on a call, the first time we came on was to talk about the expansion. We talked about role player, and I asked the question about art style, and it was generic. Like there's a guy in a suit of armor,
right,
on the front cover. And what you were saying was you wanted to kind of make generic fantasy because people can kind of put themselves into it.
Right.
Like it's a good baseline for people to, to imagine whatever, like, okay, I'm going to turn this guy into, I can write whatever story I want with him. It doesn't come prepackaged. And yet, as it's gone on, you've kind of gone away from the generic. It sounds like you've really built something over there. Right. I mean, maybe talk about that process a little bit.
I mean, it's actually been really, it kind of got flipped on its head, It's like, the idea was that it was always going to be generic. And then there's a lot of fans of the game that like, they want it to do more things. They want like, hey, I want to play my character in something, or I want to fight monsters with my character, because people get attached to characters they create. So like, monsters,
isn't that weird? Isn't that crazy? Like you just roll dice and now it's like, oh, my scoundrel with the heart of gold or whatever.
This character becomes like a real thing in their imagination, and they want to like flesh it out even further. And that's totally awesome. So monsters became kind of response number one in terms of like, okay, you can fight some stuff. And then it's like there's more artwork, and it's starting to feel like it has more of an identity. And then when we start working on these narrative things where we're like building stories in the world, so now, I mean, we're talking about role player adventures now, but that is kind of my full answer. So like monsters is like my half answer. Like, okay, this is a character building game. So you want to fight some monsters. That's cool. Here's some monsters to fight. But it's like, if you want to take your character on an adventure, then role player adventures is like my full answer, where you can have these narrative experiences and make important choices that are going to steer the story one way or another. And kind of I'd always been thinking about that because I get that feedback from people all the time, and that's something that I'm personally interested in. But the scope of a project like that, just starting to think about it is like, okay, I'm a one-man designer publisher. I basically would have to like shut down everything else I do and work on this thing for a year or so to get it done. And that's kind of a daunting task. It's like put all the eggs in that basket. And, but then I had a good friend of mine who's like, amateur designer and a good friend of mine. He's like, hey, I've got this idea. What do you think about working on like a narrative game? And I was like, yeah, I've had this idea. But he's like, I want to do it. And I'm like, okay. He's like, I'm an English teacher. Like, this is my jam. This is what I do. And he loves, game books like, Lone Wolf and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, if you want to do this, I'll do it with you. But I mean, a lot of the weight of the project, we're going to have to share it. Right. So, that's kind of where that project started. And then he brought on another writer to help him out. So there's like 3 of us working on this thing, and we've been working on it for 9 months. But since all this kind of narrative is starting to build up, then we start looking back at the old game at role player, and it's like, okay, the guy in the red armor on the front of Role Player, who was originally this kind of generic everybody, and any man. Mm-hmm. Now he's an important character in this adventures game.
Now
so
he's Hrothgar from Ugluk, and
right.
he
so
wants
now
to save Princess such and such.
Right, so he has a story now. So then we start kind of going back and kind of infusing all this narrative into these things that were developed without one. So it's been an interesting process. Mm-hmm. And then, Lockup is kind of the first step out, into the kind of world building. And so, like, the Role Player has a name now, and it's got kingdoms, and it's got kings with names, and it's got factions that hate each other and all this stuff. So it's been an organic process and really interesting. And then it's just kind of like, at this point, teaching, gamers about it and like trying to get them excited about it too.
Mm-hmm. So let's get back to mechanisms. So mechanisms for Lockup, we talked about this sense of like a suspicion, and suspicion is an actual mechanic in the game. Like there are actual cubes. So could you tell us, break down how that works?
Yeah, suspicions is super important and maybe one of the more unique things in the game. So at each round, these characters called goons come out each round, right? And then depending on where they're placed, they kind of mechanically put suspicion in different rooms. And then
are they like stooges? They're like rats. They're ratting people out.
Yeah, well, one of them are rat men actually, but you can hire these goons in the chow hall. So like that's where you get your grub, and you can make some moves and hire some people to kind of be part of your crew. But they come out and mechanically they just kind of decide randomly which rooms are going to have suspicion, and then when you're placing your workers. Whoever has the highest strength is going to get the best reward, but they're also going to get the suspicion if it's there, unless you have your special token, which is your lookout, and he basically makes you ineligible to get the suspicion. And suspicion is not something you want. So there's a supply of 12 cubes, and basically what happens is when you need to pull a 13th cube and it's not there, then a raid occurs. So the guards do a raid, and the people with the most points basically lose points. So if you have the most suspicion, you're going to lose 8 points, and that's a lot of points. So you can't really ignore the suspicion, right? So you have to be doing your best to keep that at least underneath what everybody else has.
Yeah, and there's cards that you can kind of push suspicion to other folks. So it really, like, I saw this question in the forums a lot, and you answered it, but I guess you answered for our audiences. Is this game mean? Is this game take that? Is this game, like, am I really trying to, like, Munchkin style screw my neighbor by giving him suspicion and taking stuff from them? Is that kind of the intention of it?
I would say it's not a light and fluffy worker placement game. There is,
it's not Stone Age.
It's not Stone Age for sure. There's conflict in the game, and there, which is nothing like Role Player, in which there's like very little conflict, and people complain about that. So, in this game, there's definitely conflict. So you're trying to out each other in the different spaces and trying to bluff each other, and then there are opportunities to push suspicion around. That is usually coming on goon cards that I mentioned come out at the beginning of each round, and anybody can hire them as long as you have the resources to, and you're kind of first in line. You'll get your first shot at them in the chow hall, which is where you're deciding, like, hey, here's this goon card that somebody could give their suspicion to me, which basically they're kind of ratting the other players out to the guards, and somebody can get that and they can give you a suspicion, and that can suck. But like you saw it coming, and you could have done something about it. I think that part of the nature of the game is that it's not as light and fluffy as some worker placement games, and I think that's what gives it some of its charm. It's definitely not like Munchkin, where all day long we're just kind of playing random cards on each other, saying, "Oh, you lose 3 health," or you get to, it's not like a lose a turn card or something like that.
Yeah, it's like you're stunned, you just sit there.
Right. So the player has agency to try to avoid that if they want. Okay. And then there's tome cards which you can get. So basically, if you go to a location and like I mentioned, the infirmary before, where first place is going to get 3 or whatever, and last place is going to get 1, and the people in the middle get nothing. They don't get nothing. They get pushed to the library, and then at the very end, if you're in the library, then you get to draw a tome card, which is kind of like a what's that called? It starts with a C. Consolation prize. Yeah,
it's late.
So it's like a consolation prize, and then if you can hold on to that, and it'll give you, it's secret, and it counts for a point if you don't spend it. But they're kind of rule breaky cards. It's like, hey, you can just take 2 resources, or you can pick up one of your workers that you previously placed down, or and there's one that's like immediately take the first player marker. So like, right. And you can play those, and the other people don't know them. They know you have a card. So I wouldn't say it's super take that, but there's some opportunities to interact, I would say.
I think it's like, and there needs to be a term for like, that's not screwing with the neighbor, but messing with them. You know, like a middle term. Like I feel like, you know, people go straight to that. Okay, oh, this is a mean take that game or whatever it is. Like a game could be like mischievous. You know, maybe that's the term.
I think you
it's
just
a mischievous game. It's not a mean game at all. It definitely comes out, you know, looking at the specs and the videos and all. And there's a ton of videos. I mean, I have to commend you on the Kickstarter. Tons of videos, you know, everything is clear and all that kind of stuff. It's almost like you've done this before.
Yeah, this is my 6th game, my 7th Kickstarter, I guess. So, and I probably, I probably invested more money on this one, getting prepped and taking more time to get prepped, because it's like if you launch a Kickstarter and then there was stuff wrong and you spend like 2-3 days scrambling to try to fix things and get videos up, and if you don't plan to make sure that videos are in place in time, right. That is like not fun. Like, well, running a Kickstarter is not particularly fun in general. They're kind of soul sucking sometimes because there's so much on the line and you've put so much into it, and backers have expectations that you may or may not be meeting, and you're just fighting to find to try to get attention on the game, and because there's so many great games out there to look at, and people's dollars obviously are limited, and
we have Kickstarter previews all the time.
Yeah.
He's like, stop. Speaking of expectations, I know you are always ahead of this one. Fans always expect solo modes. From Thunderworks games, they expect solo mode from Kickstarters in general where they can get them. This game launched with a solo mode. It is not a stretch goal. I know you're a big believer in having that stuff integrated as far as possible. So maybe tell us a little bit about the solo mode for Lockup.
Yeah, so it's, I definitely Thunderworks games is, I believe that moving forward, all games that we publish should have single-player modes. And so at some point, I'll find a game that it just doesn't work. But until that happens, I think that it's definitely something I want to include.
Especially in the adventure space. Like, it'd be hard, like, if it's something like that was very direct combat-y, that'd be a little bit tough. But, I mean, it's adventures, man. We're all working together and, going against bad guys and stuff. That's just rife for solo and all that good stuff.
For sure. I mean, the one that was tricky is when I did Dual Powers earlier this year. That's a 2-player game, and we developed a single-player mode for it, and that's the one that kind of branches from the original, like the core gameplay the most. I like to make sure that the multiplayer game and the single-player game, feel pretty much the same. It shouldn't be like a different game with the same components. This one is definitely. So the way this one works, there's quite a few solo specific components, and I think it was important to have it on day one. I think, like you mentioned, solo stretch goals I think are, kind of lame.
It's an invitation for people to gripe, and you want to try to reduce those.
Right. It's like, here's something that people complain about. Well, I'm going to remove that so the complaining is minimized, right? Because, it should just be there. So anyway, the way it works is there's a deck of guard cards, and you can set the difficulty by the configuration of that card. So, or the configuration of the deck. So you always have the blue cards, and then if you want to play on the easiest mode, you shuffle in the green cards. If you want to play the medium, then you shuffle in the yellow ones instead, and the hardest one you shuffle in the red ones. And you at the beginning of each round, you shuffle that deck, and you put one face down in each one of the locations. So the guards are going to be out there, but you don't know what they are. And then you take your turn, and then on the guard's turn, you can choose one of those guards to flip face up, so you have some information about what they have. And then there's a second deck called the location deck, and you flip that card, and some of them say off duty, and then nothing happens. But other ones say like, hey, it's the exercise yard. So then you take another card off the top of the deck, of the guard deck, and you put it in the exercise yard. So it kind of simulates growing power in some of these areas that you're kind of fighting for majority on. And then it resolves like any other, like the multiplayer game, where you go from location to location to see who has the most and who has the least, and both either the player or the guards are getting rewards, and they're gaining in power, and so are the players.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a lot, but I know that you're committed to kind of a low maintenance solo. Would you say that you were able to hit that goal of like a low maintenance yet challenging solo bot?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general this game is like once you get a couple rounds in, it snaps pretty fast, right? It's not everything is pretty logical, and it moves along really quickly. And I think because of that allowed the solo mode be a little bit, have that, basically have two little decks to manage. So that's like not, super simple, but I wouldn't say it's complex by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a slick thing, and I like the variable difficulty, and there's a lot of decision points along the way, because you're kind of choosing where you want to know information about where they're at, and then you're also kind of what's that called?
You're running a Kickstarter. It's 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, there's a bit of press your luck. You're pressing your luck to see what locations and what information the guards are at, and those decks are small, right? The location deck is I want to say it's got 9 or 10 cards in it or something. So it's like after the first round, the exercise yard comes up. He's not going to go in the exercise yard again, and so you're like, well, I want to see what that is. So now I have a clear idea of what the guards are doing there. So then I can tiptoe around them and make sure I get the award that I want. So solo mode's cool, and I think it turned out really well. The original Stan Kordonsky is the designer of the game, and then I had John Brieger. I don't know if you're familiar with that name. John did a bunch of development stuff on Rurik, Dawn of Kiev, which Stan also designed. That was on Kickstarter earlier this year. Peacekeeper Games published it, and the owner of that is Kirk Dennison, who's also in Madison, Wisconsin with me. Good friend.
It's a hotbed of gaming talent over there.
Dude, there are a lot of game designers here. Yeah. There's probably 12 to 15 published game designers here in town. So they're like, you're tripping over them. So, which makes, some really good playtest sessions, right? There's lots of
a lot of ferment. You can have an umpub just right in the middle of Madison.
Yeah, we've got a Protosphere here, and we have one in Milwaukee, just an hour away. And the Game Crafter is here in town. If you're familiar with them, they sponsor events too, and which is super convenient for me because when I print off a prototype, I can just drive over and pick it up, and it saves me a lot of money and time.
Awesome.
Yeah. I started to talk about John. So John did some development work on Rurik for Stan and Kirk. So he helped me out on this one as kind of he took the helm on the development on this one. Like I did a lot of stuff early, and I was like, I think it's pretty good. And John, but I want you to take a look at it and just kind of make sure everything's awesome, So he ran tons and tons of additional playtests in his group, and he created this this elaborate mathematical model of the game, and to look at how all the numbers work out, and as a result, we bumped a number up or bumped a number down, and did a lot of super fine polish on the game, and he worked on the solo mode for quite a while as well. So he kind of took what Stan started and added a little polish. So that was this game. This is one of the most polished. I would say it's definitely a super polished game, and I think the artwork on it's awesome. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was we're starting to talk about like how the game came to be. So Stan had submitted a second version to me. I thought it was cool and did a bunch of playtesting, and then we just kind of, at that point, it's like starting to develop the look of it, So obviously, it was actually one of Stan's early ideas, like, hey, what if this is attached to the role player brand somehow? So I was like, well, that's an interesting idea. It's like, why would I have these kind of two generic fantasy games that I'm publishing, you might as well connect them somehow. So then there was kind of this long process, or just this process of thinking about how would this make sense in the role player world. And one of the ways that we thought of early is that when the Monsters and Minions expansion came out for role player, there was kind of this robot race that backers voted for that I wasn't like super big on the idea, but the backers had spoken, so we did it. We did it. And I was like, well, what if the robots are like the guards? That makes sense. Like, it's like this automaton, prison, because, who wants to be a prison guard? You make the robots do it, right? So,
well, like in my golems. Mind, I mean, a golem could be a thing, right?
Right. Sure. So then there's like, I'm looking at all the content in role player and figuring out, who's living in this place, who's imprisoned, and what are the roles of these different races and that kind of stuff. Trying to see as many kind of thematic connections to the stuff that I have coming in the future and the stuff I've done in the past. So, I look through the Minions deck from Monsters and I say, I can see this guy as a prisoner. So then it turned into like, the goblins and the bugbears, like all the guys that were in the Minions deck that I felt were humanoid enough to be like people could identify with as kind of prisoners. Like, you wouldn't have a prison full of giant snakes, right? It's like, right. What crime have they committed, right? So, and then I didn't really have a good option for the fifth one. So then we kind of created this new one, which are the insectoids. And then as part of like the Kickstarter, I'm offering 6 promo cards for role player, and one of them are the insectoids. So it's like I'm kind of backfilling some of these ideas with promo cards for my previous games. So it's been kind of fun to do that. And there's if the Kickstarter does well, there's like a mini expansion. Spoiler alert, a mini expansion that's going to get added that's like a pretty direct tie into role player stuff that I'm pretty excited about. So
yeah, it's funny because my last question here is the future of the role player franchise, but I feel like it's so soaked into Lockup and kind of baked in the entire process that we've been just talking about role player the entire time. I mean, you have plenty of stuff. Like you have an adventure game coming out, and I imagine there's a couple other things in the pike.
Yeah, there's the next thing kind of in the universe is I don't want to call it a roll and write game because there's no dice in it. It's like flip and write game where you're building fantasy maps, which is kind of like you're basically building, mapping out the kingdom of Nalos, which is a thing.
Wow!
And that's a small game that'll be probably January, February, and then there's a second expansion for role player that's well on its way called Fiends and Familiars, which is coming, and then Adventures. So it's like I've got all this role player stuff coming, and I hope people get into it and start to appreciate the brand, not brand, but world building. But I also want to, booyah!
I'm on a video call with Keith. I just showed him my box of role player. It's right there. It's waiting for stuff to get filled into it.
Yeah, we're gonna see the second expansion is pretty meaty. We might need to get you a bigger box. We'll see.
Oh, okay. Well, we need the nesting egg box, the box within a box within a box, to see if we can make that happen.
Yeah, I've got a couple pretty interesting ideas on how to do that, but we'll see how it works out. Anyway, but it's like I don't want to be. I mean, I'm kind of known as the role player guy, but I want to do more stuff than that. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I did that Russian history game, the Dual Powers, right. And I've got some other stuff that I'm looking at that I decidedly like. I want to do some non-fantasy stuff, so that I don't kind of get stuck in a rut. But yeah.
Oh man, I mean, you got all sorts of stuff popping. It sounds like the schedule is full. Lockup looks like a lot of fun. Like I was saying before, the worker placement has a special place in my heart. Fantasy worker placement as like a good gateway. I mean, people can understand worker placement even when there's a lot going on the board. Like, I mean, you put your piece down, you get a thing, and you add up your things, you change them in for more things. I mean, it sounds boring, but you put that fantasy veneer on it, and you give a little interaction, and it just kind of opens up for a whole wide range of people. So I mean, I wish you luck, man. This sounds like a really, really fun deal.
Yeah, the like when I first looked at it, we talked about Stone Age a little bit. It was like, to me, I mean, I love Stone Age, so Stone Age to me is like the perfect like intro worker placement game for people. And I was thinking, like, there aren't that many, like, at least that I can think of, that are like medium light worker placement games that are really fun. That, like, I feel like there's an area for that there, right? It's like there's a lot of,
Right.
Agricola, Caverna, Tzolk'in, heavy duty worker placement stuff, but there's not that many like really solid medium light worker placement stuff. And I think there's an opportunity. So that's why I think Lockup is kind of fits into that spot. So.
Cool. All right. Well, that was Lockup. This was Keith Matejka. Thank you so much for spending a late night. Well, not that late, but we're dads. So anything past our kids going to bed is a late night for us. But thank you so much for joining the show. And good luck with the project.
Hey, I appreciate it. Take care, man.
And that's going to do it for another episode of the Every Night is Game Night preview series. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Keith, and thank you to Lyle. Every week we talk, it's either me or it's Anthony, about joining us, engaging us in conversation, letting us know what you want so that we can really tailor the content and make it interesting for you. And Lyle actually followed the advice. He wanted to hear something, so we were able to make it happen. Please, if any of you want the same, if you want us to cover a particular Kickstarter, if you want us to cover particular episodes, if you're looking to, maybe criticize some of the structure, ask different questions, have different guests on, anything, we are open to anything. I know we've been doing this for, with the preview series, we're about to hit like 150 episodes. It's a lot, but we're always looking to improve. We'll just change it up. So please, if you have anything to contribute, like I said, ENGN_podcast on Twitter, Every Night is Game Night on Facebook, the Geek List. Go ahead and throw a comment in there or throw me a geek mail. I'm very open to suggestions. Please feel like you're a part of this community. And I'll ask you guys one more time. Not one more time. What am I talking about? I'm going to ask for this every single time. Please give us a rating on iTunes, 5 stars or however many stars you think we deserve. A written review also helps as well. Anywhere we can rate podcasts, we could use all the help that we can get. So that's going to do it. This is Jason signing off. Later, everybody.